and sometimes they can do better than people.
Yeah.
Like, some types of math. Even now they can write pretty well.
Yeah.
But I don't think they can do this, and there's certain things that'll be really hard for them to learn. But I'm always curious about how you can, like a lot of people who suffer from pain or injury, like you could, Tai Chi could help them, but it's hard. Tai Chi is very hard to really stay motivated or to keep practicing for years and years, because you can't just practice it a few times and go to the Tai Chi person and you're like, oh, I'm good. It takes years, of training, because it's about your mind. But I wonder if there are some like small what's that called again? Some ideas that you can start to use to help people very simply notice or predict where people might have what's that called? The word is where people have like weakness or collapse in their bodies. So like when you put hands on somebody, sometimes you can tell where their tension is by your feeling. And I wonder if there could be a way that even with a device, you can notice the tension, where the tension is, and at least tell people, oh, you have a lot of tension in your right hip, and that will probably lead to knee pain, or predict, oh, you'll probably have some neck pain or something like that. That would be a very helpful thing for people.
If you train in the AI machine, you from the fourth point of view, the AI cannot win. I think you just training from the feeling and.
It'd be interesting though, because the way you train it is like, it really doesn't have to know anything about like the theory. So you could, you know how you're taking all these videos, you can give it all these videos that you did, like and it'll like break the video into pictures, like, millions of pictures. But every time somebody gets uprooted, you could almost train it to then notice where in their body visually, like, okay, person loses balance and I see these patterns. Oh, maybe they see this pattern a lot, or this pattern. So then you give it any picture of a person and it will tell you, oh, they're likely to fall over left or right, or, and I don't know. So maybe there's a way to give, but you would have to do it like through image. Through the sense.
But like we push hands, the movement is very smaller, they needed very sensitive.
Right. So what's interesting though? The thing is that a lot of times, like the thing that I think computers can do better than humans is they can look at patterns. And they could maybe it could discover patterns that we don't think about, because we understand Tai Chi more conceptually. Like, okay, like if I'm holding tension somewhere in my body, then I'm gonna get like lose balance. But maybe the machine would come up with other ideas, like okay. It would say something like, oh, I notice when your stance is like this, you fall 60% more, or it will come up with patterns that we don't even think about, because it's just trained to notice anything, so you could kind of like then apply it to somebody normally, like like someone standing and waiting for the train who has hip problems. I'm sure that a lot of the reason why they have hip problems is because they stand this way, and of course the machine won't know they're not doing Tai Chi, but they could look at it and go, okay, I've been trained on Tai Chi images. This person has a lot of likely will fall to the left, or and then the machine might say, oh, okay, I don't know, maybe the machine could tell them like, okay, you have you're unstable or weak in your right side, and then of course you could send that to a doctor or something like that, and then the doctor would like have like exercises for the person to do. But it's tricky. It's interesting. It's an interesting problem.
Yes, just like here, you didn't move me.
Yeah.
You a little release.
Yeah.
You try the This little movement already make me unbalanced, but the video cannot show.
Right.
Cannot find this this small movement. Here, with no problem. This you feel lost balance. What I do, the video cannot tell you, maybe. Yeah, you see, this is small movement. You see, video can find.
You know what I think about too? Yeah, like you're saying, because a lot of the Tai Chi is about not moving. Not responding. You know, like, so if you move and I don't move, then it's more likely that I'm gonna lose my balance. And it's not always just about, maybe it is, but I don't really, it's not always just about like where the tension. It's also about sensitivity, like, and it's about time, because like it has to, if the person doesn't respond to the other person's movement, then they might lose their balance easier. So that's an interesting issue, because it almost has to be trained on the previous image. If the person gets knocked over, it has to look at the previous image and go, okay, did the person move or something like that in a certain way? This is an interesting question, because we're working on something called recurrent neural networks, or RNN. And it's like, you know, with translation, that's a really hard problem, because, you know, you can't just take a word and turn it into the Chinese word. You have to look at the words before and after and say, okay, this probably relates to these words, so it likely means this. And that's a hard problem, because, you know, it's a lot of data to look at.
And not a one-to-one.
And so I think Tai Chi is like that too. It's not just about the moment, it's also about what you just did leading up to this moment. Did you actually respond to that person's movement? And the touch point sensitivity, the force change and the direction is complicated. It's a small movement. So, you know, this is just an interesting question. Like, I was listening to this guy talk about the ChatGPT, you know, and ChatGPT doesn't know anything about feeling, and it doesn't know anything about seeing, really. It just knows text. But because people have written about everything, people have written about feeling, people have written about what a sunset looks like, what a tree looks like, you can have, ChatGPT can actually create like an image using pixels, like, you know, pixels are just numbers. It can, like, you can say create a sunset, and it'll create a sunset with pixels, you know. So he was talking about how, while it doesn't have the ability to see or feel, everything in its world is about description. And because of that, though, it then does have the ability to like kind of make images. So it's interesting, like if you train the robot just with images of like Tai Chi, the robot would learn to react based on memory. Like, okay, the person who's here, like I have millions of images of people responding to that, so then I'm gonna, you know, find the one that most makes sense and move that way. It would be an interesting thing. It wouldn't learn by feeling the way we learn. It would learn by image.
But if what the image he see maybe wrong. If like now video a lot use force, now he this kind of react.
No, that's a really good point. So that's why you would have to, I mean, there are many ways, like that's a big problem, because a lot of data is bad data. There are a lot of mistakes that So you would either have to have a human go in and label good, bad, bad, good, bad. It would be really, really hard. Or you could also one thing you can do is actually do something called, they call it reinforcement learning, where you basically you give it a task, like, okay, you're not allowed to fall over. You know what I mean? You're not. You can't lose your balance. You tell the computer you can't lose your balance, and then you train it by, you know, maybe doing Tai Chi with it, or hitting it with like a block or something like that, and you know, you give it points for the amount of time it can stay standing, and so eventually it starts to find the types of things it needs to do to be upright. And they use this a lot to train like robot dogs and stuff like that. Have you seen a robot dog? They train it that way because at first, you know, like they tell it, okay, you have to move from here to there, and the robot doesn't know how to move, but it starts to do all sorts of weird things, like almost like a baby. And sometimes like I've seen simulations, video simulations, where they are doing this with a simulation, and it will learn really weird ways of walking. Like it'll learn like one leg, and it'll do all sorts of weird things. So it's an art. You have to kind of give it more and more instruction and train it. But you know, I don't know. It's one way to think about the issues. Like you can train it on all the images, and then it will kind of probably, you're right, like have a lot of bad habits. And then maybe you have to train it with like some sort of reinforcement.
Yeah. But the difficulty is some people say it's right, some people say it's wrong.
You're like, look, you gotta stand more like this. You gotta stand more like this.
Yeah.
There's a lot of different schools. Yeah, and the funny thing is that, I mean, I think like with writing, most people can agree that certain things are really good writing. But with Tai Chi, there's very few people who are good, you know, people who really understand it. And then still there's so much argument. And it would be hard to find enough data to really train it. That's good data. You'd have to train it. You'd have to run the machine. Someone who has a lot of knowledge.
So I always think people say, oh, later maybe human being will be controlled by the AI. I don't think. It's always human being control. Maybe AI once got the human being right idea, he can do better than people. But they
make
can
a decision on their own.
make